Everyone, welcome back to the show. It's a weird feeling doing an interview. I haven't done one in, I don't know, Spencer, it's been a while, right? Few weeks at least.
Yeah, even closer to a month even.
That's so wild. I can't remember the last time I did that. It's like you haven't gone on a run in a long time. So today, everyone, we have a guest that I'm real excited about, someone who is both a friend and someone that I've worked with for many years. So Kerris, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy that we got the training wheels back on.
Totally. Okay, so big question to start. Tell us about who you are and what you do.
Big question indeed. So who I am, I guess, is multifaceted. I think ultimately, from a professional perspective, I'm an HR leader. So that's probably the easiest way to put it in a bucket. But it goes deeper than that. I think, my purpose really is around supporting, helping others to be able to bring their best selves to work, and to be able to, really kind of be able to be authentic, but at the same time bring a lot of value and feel valued in their working environment. We spend so much time at work, and being able to see people thrive and flourish and grow and develop is just such a passion of mine. So I love that. But I'm also a mum, I'm a wife, I play soccer, I ride motorbikes, I hike with my dog in the mountains here in North Vancouver. From the UK originally, moved over here just over 10 years ago with my family, and fell in love with the place and decided we'd never leave. I guess that's kind of on the surface who I am.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You've had a really storied career, but I want to hit you with something tough right off the bat.
Oh. I knew it. Go on.
Well, okay. You'll know this because you've also come up in different kinds of businesses and had different kinds of roles. HR is an interesting, can have different perspectives. So, for example, sometimes I'll work with companies and HR will be relegated to almost just the task handlers, go take care of these things for us.
Yep.
In other companies, they can be viewed as kind of like the rule makers and the people who keep things from
police.
happening. Yeah, the police, like the company
fun
police.
police.
Yeah, or just even the company police.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting thing because you and I know the value of having a strong, really, really strong HR team, strong HR leader. I would say these different ideas of how people interact with HR could be like strong business partner, or have a great seat at the table, or it's like, they're the police, or they're just the task doers. What do you think the key ingredient is from your perspective on how you've built your career on having a seat at the table as an HR leader, like being considered as this is just another business function. You're a business leader. What's the key ingredient of being able to have that seat at the table and then build an HR team that are truly viewed as business people in the business?
Yeah, this is a great question. I love it. And I love blowing the doors off the stereotypes around HR, because I don't have a traditional HR background. I'm not classically trained in HR. I've come up from a very, very different route. And so, when we talk about HR, in its more traditional, more kind of stereotypical way, that's not who I am. So I don't bring that to the table. And, at any time that I've moved jobs, I've always been really honest about that. That's not my background. I'm not kind of classically trained in that way. So being able to kind of take a step away from what the kind of core perception of HR is, has been something that comes naturally to me because I never grew up that way. So it's kind of fun in some sense. I think there's a couple of things. I think, ultimately what it comes down to is the majority of most businesses' cost is on their people. Like in a lot of organizations I've worked at, it's anywhere between kind of 60 to 90% of the cost of the company is spent on people. And whether that's salaries, whether that's benefits, whether that's training, learning and development, whatever it might be. And so if as an organization, you're literally spending the majority of the money that you make and earn and the profit that comes from that on people, why wouldn't you pay a lot of attention to how your people are treated, developed, grown, attracted, retained? It's such a huge expense for an organization that even if you just take out, it's the right thing to do, even if you take that away from it, it's like, this is your biggest cost. So why wouldn't you have somebody with a strategic mindset around managing people at the top table? Because it doesn't make sense to do it any other way.
Right. But what's the key ingredient to getting there though? Like, and to be real, even more precise, I'm always kind of horrified when I understand why people do it. They talk about like profit centers versus cost centers.
Yeah.
And like, I understand why people do it. Like what brings money in versus what costs us money.
Yeah.
But like, it's kind of a crazy way of thinking because so many people put focus on their like quote unquote profit centers. But it's like, if you look at HR like a cost center, it's like viewing it as like something. I look at it almost like I look at HR in a positive way, like investment bankers. Like you put all your trust in investment bankers, right? Because you want to grow. You want to grow
your assets.
Your assets.
That's it.
Why wouldn't you do that? But that kind of cost center versus profit center thinking is partially what I think is at the core of this. But going back to the initial question, what's the key to being an HR leader that has like a real seat at the table?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. I think that there's, first of all, you do have to dispel some of the myth in terms of what it is HR is there to do, because there is a lot of misconception around what HR is there to do. And once you dispel that myth through education, through relationship building, through working with leaders and executives across the organization, and a recognition of the value and importance, then you have an opportunity to be able to get not just invited to that table, but valued at that table and as part of the core conversation. And then it becomes the opportunity, when people are having discussions around how to change something, improve something, reduce something, whatever it might be at that top table, it's like, okay, well, how do we have the people on board to do that? Like, who do we need to do this? And who's got the skill set to do this? And then it's not just a nice to have HR at the table. It's an imperative to have HR at the table. So I think a lot of it has to go into the leaders within HR being able to demonstrate that kind of core value to the organization, dispel some of the myths about what HR is there to do, and then be able to provide strategies and actions and initiatives that will actually move the needle in terms of where you want to go. And so a lot of that comes from being able to demonstrate the ROI, like what is the return on the investment in the people side of things, and being able to demonstrate that in a way that leaders across different functions is able to actually grasp. So some of that will be conceptual, some of that will be factual, some of that will be data-driven, some of that will be more creative in a sense. It depends on who you're working with, but you need to be able to adapt to the person that you're speaking with and their background and their experiences to be able to demonstrate that value so that then it becomes no question. Well, of course, HR is going to be there.
Yeah. Well, if you think of yourself, let's say 5 years ago in your career, and then 2 years ago in your career, and then now. So it's kind of a 3-stage question. What did you change from 5 years ago to 2 years ago that helped you do that? And then what did you change from 2 years ago to now to help you achieve where you're at now in terms of like being that business? Well, yeah, like a lot, right? It's a tough question though, because I want you to think like, what was the thing that got me to that 2-year space? And I'm picking these timeframes because you've been now in different jobs within those timeframes. So what are the things that you've changed from 2 years to 5, or from 5 years to 2 years? What were the main changes that you made to kind of take that seat at the table and to hold it?
I think that some of it comes with just some like internal changes around how you view things, how you perceive things, how you mature, how you gain experience, and then from that, how you grow confidence. So I think that some things that have changed in me that kind of 5 to 2 years was certainly around confidence in being able to interact and engage on a much deeper level with executive leadership. I think that was a definite kind of shift from an internal perspective, but then externally, and you'll laugh at this, being able to report up is so important. And you know this, like I had a sticker on my wall in my office that said, "Planning to make a plan is not a plan," and recognizing that leadership need to see more in terms of, okay, what are the projects and what are the expected outcomes of those, and then how do you track them, how do you measure them, and how do you report upon them so that you're consistently providing this value feedback. And that's a huge thing that I think I recognized in myself as always had this conversation with leaders. Oh my God, you've done this. This is great. You've achieved this. All that success in that. But the question was, how did you even get that done? Because nobody knew, because my plan was in my head and it was never out there, and there was never then a way to track and measure, what that looked like. And I think that was a big kind of change in me from that 5 to 2 years, was to say, okay, I need to grow up. Like, I need to mature in terms of how I demonstrate the value. And that's been a huge learning curve for me over those kind of 3 years to be able to do that. So that was a huge one.
Yeah. There's like that kind of like show your work when you're doing a math assignment.
100%. Yeah. Which I used to hate, by the way.
Totally. And when we first met, it's like, without a doubt, you would crush things. You get things totally done.
Yeah.
But people only knew about the results, what they're stoked on.
Yes.
They didn't see all the things that you did to make it happen, to get there. And that whole idea of like your business expertise.
Yes.
Right. They just see an HR leader getting that thing done that they wanted, and they're happy with that. But like, they didn't understand all of the moves and how you had to do that, the strategy involved.
That's it.
And the thing I'd encourage people to think about here, this isn't like holding up, like, look how amazing I am. Like, it's not like boastful. It's about demonstrating the deep capabilities you have to make something happen, so they can give you bigger projects, put more trust in you, and give you that, or so that you can take that seat at the table and hold it.
And you just nailed it. Trust. Like that's a huge piece of it. And I think that to get that seat at the table, you do need to be a trusted advisor. And you talk about this with Cadence, right? All the time. And but that term cannot be underestimated, because unless you've built that trust, and that trust will only come through credibility, it'll come through repeated demonstration of your skills and experience. And unless you're doing that on a regular basis and you're telling people about that, you're not going to build that trust.
Totally.
So, having to build that trust was something that you do need to demonstrate. And as you say, it's not about, fanfare. Hey, look at me and how wonderful I am. And it's usually the team. It's not, but it's really about saying, okay, here's the critical thinking. Here's the decision making. Here's what we tried that didn't work. Here's what we tried that then did work. Here's how we shifted or adjusted, or here's why we needed that extra budget. Or like, you have to show all of those pieces along the way in order to be able to build that credibility and that trust, which really counts.
Totally. I used to have this way of going about things when I was younger career, which is like, I would just outwork my competition.
Yes.
And I had to, like, I worked in this one workplace for quite a while, where it was like, the decision making was so wild. Like, you just basically were like, okay, this whole place is just kind of held together by bubblegum. And like, I know that I have to just deliver results. Yeah. But if I try and talk through too many of the results, they don't trust me enough. So if I'm like, hey, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that, they would just poke holes in it or be like, that's not going to work. So actually, I just took everything underground and just like outworked and worked crazy hours and did all this stuff. And like, kind of modern thinking from a business perspective, people might be like, well, you shouldn't have to do that. Well, no, I shouldn't have to do that, but it's what I had to do if I wanted to be successful at that job. And there was all sorts of benefits, but there's all sorts of like terrible stuff. Like, it was not good. But I did get to a point where I started having big results, and the leadership at the time were like, wow, you really, you proved us wrong, basically. How did you do it? And from that point forward, I was like, this is how I did it. And I explained it. But after that, they were super interested in hearing how I did things. And my ability that I learned, that I had to develop, was talking about how I would do things and what the plan was. I had to earn that space. But once I had that space, there was like an audience that was willing to listen to it. And it's really what set me up to do Cadence. Yeah. Like, figuring out how to get it done in the background and just outwork the competition, but then also to like be able to show like, oh no, I actually am a good business person and I understand strategy and how to do these things. That not only set me up to do Cadence, it set me up to like change my whole life, and like kind of putting my hands on the I'm doing handlebars because you ride motorcycles. I'll put my hands on the handlebars. That was a big game changer. But okay, let's talk about 2 years to now, because I saw a big shift in you, let's say 5 years ago to 2 years ago, huge shift. A lot of that, though, I agree with you. It's like, even how you speak is so much different. Like, you're just like so much more confident, and never that you were like some kind of shrinking from confidence, but I'd say it's focused confidence rather than big confidence, like, a big presence. Now it's much more like seated confidence that's based in like a senior leader who can handle it. The way you talk about things is different. But what about 2 years to now? Because I'd say there's even a bigger change from 2 years ago to now.
Yeah, it's the last 2 years, 2.5 years probably, has been huge from a career development perspective. And I mean, there's a bunch of things that happened, and it was almost a perfect storm. You couldn't write it. So I figured out that I wanted to do my executive MBA because as I was getting to that kind of senior leadership space, I needed to know what other leaders were thinking and what they were doing in their various departments. And by getting a more broader understanding of how business works was really important to me so that I could come to the table and not know what they do, but be able to ask the right questions, ask smart questions to get the answers back. And I didn't know what the questions were, so I needed to figure out that piece of it. So some development in that area was for me a kind of a piece of groundwork that I needed to do. So 2019, I'm guessing it. Yeah, 2019, like COVID eats years, right? 2019, I started my EMBA in the September. Then very quickly, my boss, who we both know and love, left. And I was put up for interim head of HR at my last company. And then COVID hit and the world changed. Yeah. And with those three things all coming together at a really, really quick space of time, that what followed over the course of probably the next 12 to 18 months was possibly one of the hardest times in my career ever. It was that realization that I'd got to the level where there weren't that many people above me that were going to tell me what to do. COVID meant that nobody knew what to do. And, I was still trying to figure out, what everybody else was doing. And so those kind of next 12 to 18 months were huge. And, some days were literally just getting through. And some days were like these amazing eureka moments of, okay, we figured this shit out. Like we got something here. And then trying to kind of bring along with me a group of 75, 80 people in my team that were scared, anxious, worried, so many different emotions going on was another big piece of it. And so there were so many learning opportunities during those kind of 12, 18 months. And, coming out the end of it, I literally felt like, okay, it didn't break me. Like whatever comes next, I'll figure it out. I got this. Yeah. It was a crazy time. And I think that it brought so many learning opportunities, so many opportunities to interact with people that I probably wouldn't have done prior, opportunities to work with new leaders that I hadn't had the opportunity to work with, that I learned things from and hope, learned from me a little bit. And just being able to kind of immerse myself in that crazy world was something that I think from an experience perspective was so incredibly valuable to my development, even though it was really fucking hard.
Like it was such wild timing because you got the big chair, got the big chair, right? There's only one other role in your previous organization that you could have gone to, which would have been higher. Yep. So you've got the big chair, pandemic hits.
Yes.
How did you get through that?
There was some tough days. It was really long hours, especially in the first part, I think, working from East Coast to West Coast across the US when nobody knew what was happening and nobody knew what was doing. And the guidelines and rules were changing literally every day. Yeah. There was some 16, 18-hour days, like consistently for a period of time as we tried to kind of figure a lot of that out. It was super tough, but it built a whole new level of resilience in me that I didn't know I had. I didn't know I needed, but I didn't know that I had. I've always felt that I've been pretty resilient around things. I wouldn't say like that kind of, toxic positivity, but certainly I'm a glass half full, look for the silver lining type of person. But sometimes that kind of reality check around resilience was huge. But just having people around me that were, people contributed in different ways. Regardless of what level you were in the organization, from a work perspective, people contributed in different ways to kind of helping keep that sanity, that reality check, as well as kind of that grounding that I think was super important. But then, really special people in my life as well, friends and family that, were there to check in and help out. And, and I think that the other thing that happened as well was there was a shift with so many people in terms of empathy. So many leaders believed that they had to show up with a professional facade on day in, day out prior to COVID. Then COVID happened and everybody had crazy stuff going on, not just at work, but in their personal lives. And that there was a blur, there was a merge between the two. And leaders found that showing up with the professional facade was no longer going to cut it. It was no longer good enough. And so it was really, really interesting to see how their mindset shifted in terms of how they dealt with people around them, with me, with each other. And that was actually something that I think is a huge benefit that's come out of COVID, is that ability for leaders to feel like they can let that facade down and show up more authentically with more empathy. And that, I think, really helped as well. It took a few months for people to get there, but once it did, it was almost palpable, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And again, like, like when I make this commentary, I don't want to sound like I'm, like condescending, like patting you on, like, oh, good work. I just say that I've been a very privileged scenario where I've got to watch your, as you ascend in your career and the changes. And it's been really dramatic. And I actually want to hit on resiliency, because you're what I'd say, and I mean this, I hope is that you take this as a huge compliment. You're like a tough person.
Yes.
And when I say tough, I guess the thing, maybe we think the traditional idea of tough is being like, I'm tough. Well, what I mean more is like, you're very open to different ideas, and you're very convinced of your own ideas. So you're totally will have a middle ground with people and talk about ideas, but you're not going to be dismissed, bullied, shut down. You're not going to have people diminish you or force you to take a back chair. It's just, you're not going to do that.
No.
So, but let's talk about resilience. Some resilience is stuff that you just kind of, I guess we could say, like, what came first, chicken or the egg, right? Like, it's like, is it a learned thing? Is it something you're born with? You definitely came up with an amount of resilience, and you've certainly developed resilience. But let's talk about your roles, because you've been in different organizations. I would imagine some of them have been more like, oh, HR is like central to our business, they've got a seat at the table. And some probably have been less that. So in your various jobs, what role has resilience played in terms of like really, because I keep saying taking that seat, and I believe people should take that seat when it comes to like to HR. What role is taking that seat and holding it? What role has resilience played in that?
I think it's huge, actually. I think a big part, each step in your career, there's a new level of resilience. And I think that in terms of kind of taking that seat, I had to fight for it a little bit as well. Like, I was put in I was given the opportunity. It was mine to lose, which was amazing to have that opportunity. And, but then, there was a whole search process around it, as they should have done. As somebody who grew up in recruitment, I would have advised them to do exactly that. But I did have to demonstrate, my ability to fit within the vision they had for that role. And, I was, again, coming at it from a non-traditional way. And so building up the resilience was a huge part of it. But part of that resilience is also about building relationships with those people that, you don't always have to be tough with. And again, it comes down to that kind of trust and credibility. When you get a relationship with somebody that is, and you'll probably know who I'm referring to, but typically had been typically viewed as being the toughest person to deal with. And you're able to build a relationship with that person where their toughness breaks down. It enables your toughness to break down, and you can have more kind of vulnerable and genuine and authentic conversations. And when you get to that stage, that resilience piece is not always as essential, but it gets you to that point. And I think that by kind of meshing the resilience piece with the relationship building piece, if you can do the both together, there's a real opportunity for you to not have to rely on just one or the other. You've got both. But I think, it's definitely as well from an HR, thinking about it from the HR perspective, the big piece around resilience, a lot of it comes down to the kind of profit cost center that you were talking about, like how much budget are you spending, how much money are you spending, why do you need this cost, why do you need to invest in that, because it is seen at the very highest level within certain organizations as being a cost center, not a profit center, even though the work that you're doing is generating profit through the development of the people that are selling the product or service.
It's the most insane way of looking at it.
The most insane way, exactly. So one of my kind of OKRs and kind of goals in that role was to really help my team first, but then kind of permeate through the organization to demonstrate that HR was a profit center, not a cost center. But anyway, but the resilience that comes from having to day in, day out, defend and justify your position around why should you invest X number of dollars in these particular programs or people or initiatives or whatever, that was huge.
I'm just going to say, outside of your actual product, nothing is more of a profit center than HR.
Right.
Like people would be like, well, what about sales or what about development? It's like, yeah, but none of those people, unless your product develops itself and sells itself.
Sure.
Like, because without the HR team, you wouldn't have talent to even fill those spots. You wouldn't have recruiting. You wouldn't have any of those things. You'd have no structure. You'd have no workflow. No. Like calling HR a cost center is the most insane way of looking at it. And it's also like, and not that I'm anti-capitalist. I'm just saying like, that's more of a, like, I understand how it's structured from a capitalist perspective, but it's an insane way of looking at it.
Totally.
Like it should be, it's kind of like how teachers are chronically underpaid.
Yes.
It's like, that's the most insane group.
It's the most valuable job.
Yeah, it's like literally the most valuable job. They should be the highest paid people.
Yeah.
But anyways, that's a whole societal thing. All right. Okay. I'm going to quote a friend of mine named Stephen St. Germain. And he, to quote him, he said, "Some people take it way too far. Some people not far enough." Mm-hmm. And I'm using that quote to talk about progressive changes within business.
Yeah.
So we're at a time now where it's like leading up to the pandemic as well. But during the pandemic, we saw this like crisis level conversations about race, around representation within the workforce, where we can, I can very comfortably say, there's been a lot of good conversation around it, but like if I look at the workforce and I talk about like representation, I can pretty comfortably say like we got a long way to go.
Still a long way to go.
We're also in a month where every company is changing their thing to be like, the pride flag and all of that. Yeah. That's cool. Like I'm glad to see that, but we got a long way to go. But within the workforce, we have people who say this has all gone too far, and then we have a lot of people saying it's not far enough.
Yeah.
As an HR leader, how do you balance that?
It's really hard. It's really hard because it's first of all, you have to be able to differentiate your own personal views with an organizational perspective too. So there's a balance that you have to kind of find, and it's an impossible balance to find actually, but you have to try and keep that perspective, because I often had to remember that my personal views aside, society is still catching up in many ways, and other parts of society is still way ahead. Yeah. And so, as an individual who had a lot of influence and has a lot of influence over those kind of topics and those kind of changes in organizations, it was very important to always just kind of try and ground myself in the fact that whatever my own personal opinions are, and however progressive I might be, is there still needs to be balance with others who are still taking the first step on that journey even. Yeah. And by alienating them is not the best way to make change, right? Totally. So there was always that kind of piece of it. But I have to say that probably, to flip that to the other extreme, probably talking about resilience as well, but probably one of the toughest conversations I had to have at one point was about we're not doing enough. And genuinely feeling, very convicted in my stance on this, and wanting to push the envelope further, and finding obstacles and challenges and resistance and, negativity around that kind of move forward, when I knew it was the right thing. I was trying to stay grounded in being able to take all perspectives into account, but still knowing that we needed to push further and we weren't doing enough. And finding so many of those kind of blockages being put up in front of me in order to be able to achieve just even, the next step in the progress that I needed to make for the organization. And that was really hard, because that's something that as an individual you feel passionate about. It's a very emotional topic. It's very sensitive, and not feeling the level of support and encouragement and enthusiasm that you would have expected can be really, really difficult. So I think that, but being able to have the conversations in the first place is a step forward for a lot of companies.
Yes.
And so that's kind of the first piece. And then it's really about, continuing that, developing educational and awareness in terms of what's not just right for the organization, but what the people are telling you that they need from the organization, and being able to articulate that in a way that builds its own business case. But that it's really hard.
It is super hard. And, of the HR leaders, again, I kind of laugh when we talk about like profit center versus cost center, and also like who has to manage more nuances than HR leaders? Mm-hmm. Like the intensity. So I go back to that quote. It's like some people take it way too far, some not far enough. I have a kind of a privileged role when I work with organizations because, people have one-to-one conversations with me that are confidential, largely confidential. And I can hear from one person, hey, this has all gone too far. Mm-hmm. All of this diversity and inclusion stuff has gone too far. Critical race theory, it's gone too far. Like whatever thing they're saying. Yep. And they can say that to me because we're having an open conversation, and it's my job to help work with them and not convince them one way or another, but so they have a space where they can air their feelings, and then we can talk about their leadership and where we can go with things. Yeah. So in one conversation, I can have that with one person. And then my next conversation, my next hour of the day is with someone in the exact same business. They literally work in the exact same company who are saying, oh, we haven't gone far enough. Mm-hmm. Our work with diversity and inclusion is not at all far enough. Our work with, something, again, I'll just pull it, critical race theory or any, whatever it is, it's not far enough. These could be the same people. They might even work in the same business unit. They might even be at the same level of our organization, and they're both saying the opposites of each other.
Yep.
Again, I can then go on and be like, well, here's my recommendations to the company, and then on to my next assignment. Yeah. I always, when I think of organizations of any size, but especially organizations of the size of the ones that you've been leading, I'm sure, huge organizations, that balance of how do we do the right thing, it sounds nightmarish to come up with. Like, how do you carry that weight?
It is tough. I think that there's a point though where you say, for those who saying we've gone too far, I'm going to stop listening. Like I can't carry that when I know deep down that the right thing to do is to push further. And you've got that level of negativity saying we've gone too far. I don't like this. This is uncomfortable for me. This isn't the company I joined. This isn't what I signed up for. At some point you have to say enough. Like I can't carry that because it's actually wrong. Yeah. And we need to push this forward because actually the vast majority of people do want us to do more. And maybe they don't even know what it is that we need to do because they've not educated themselves to the level that they need to know what needs to be done. But they feel that we could do more, or they feel that they want to work in an environment that's better. And so even if you are coming to the table with the most privilege, whatever that represents, most people still want to work in an organization that even if it doesn't impact them, they want to work in an organization that cares about the people it's going to impact. Yeah. So, you can have conversations around, I'm at a point in my life where, we're talking about things like fertility treatments as benefits. Like that's not going to impact me, like not at my age, but I want to work for a company that cares about that and that is going to provide that and develop that for its employees. And so it comes to the point where you do have to shut down the necessity to listen to that level of negativity because it's just wrong. That's not how society is changing. That's not how society is developing. And so I'm sorry, but that is antiquated thinking and no longer part of my decision making.
Yeah. I'm going to bring this to deepen this a little bit further. And something I made a joke about earlier, it's like the time of the year where all the companies change their logo to the pride flag. And a friend of mine posted something on their Instagram making fun of that. And, I sent the little smiley face, laughing, smiling face. And then I thought about it afterwards. I'm like, do I think that's funny? Due to the nature of where I'm, the kind of work that I do, it's like I both am super hopeful, but also cynical, right? And I'm hopeful because I've seen leaders like you and leaders like other incredible leaders leading change in a way that I think is like also super thoughtful. And it's not just it's not just trying to create inclusivity of like representation, but it is also saying like, hey, if you disagree, let's talk about it. Let's figure it out. So I'm hopeful in that way, but I'm also a bit like cynical because I have also worked at enough senior levels where I can see what's kind of like, oh yeah, let's just put that stuff up because we're supposed to. And then like, let's just act however we want to act in the background. So I can see both. But after I had sent that over to my friend, I really thought about it. And I thought a lot about how like people roll their eyes now at like, okay, you know, it's Pride Month. Of course, all these corporations are going to do that. But wait a second. There's actually a ton of people who work in all those companies who feel good that their company's doing that.
Yeah.
And like, take it away from like profit margins and like the, you know, like pick whatever cartoonish like billionaire you want to. Take it away from all those. Just think of the normal rank and file worker day to day. They probably feel really good that their company is doing that. And in fact, a company isn't necessarily the CEO or any of like kind of the top people. A company is, the vast majority of the company are other people who have all different beliefs. And probably the vast majority of those people feel really good that flag is part of their logo, or at least they're neutral on it. Like, oh yeah, like that's something that should happen, but they're not against it and they're not rolling their eyes at it. They'd probably feel bad if their company didn't do that.
Yeah.
I want to get your thoughts on that though.
Yeah, I think there is definitely a piece of that. And this is the evolution piece that I think is so interesting, because from my experience and conversations that I've had, some of those who are more highly impacted by these celebrations throughout the year because they identify with whatever group we're celebrating. And some of those that are more kind of maybe highly educated, self-educated, or educated around those particular topics would probably say that we're past that now. Yeah. But there's so many people that are still catching up, and that this is actually a big step in being able to feel like you as a small cog in a big wheel are being inclusive. Like if you have the opportunity to update your banner on your LinkedIn page, or you have the opportunity to update your auto signature with a rainbow, like that for a lot of people is one of their first steps to actually being actively inclusive, like proactively inclusive around something. And so those people are still catching up. And so there's this huge spectrum of experience and knowledge, and they're coming, they're getting there. And so there is that ability through these types of events to be able to recognize how far people have come, and yet how far we still need to go. And it is a really great opportunity as a reminder, and an opportunity to share learnings and education and awareness around certain topics that for the rest of the year don't come up in day-to-day conversation. So there is value in it for sure, but there will come a point where, from an evolution perspective, we'll move past that, and that and people say, well, it shouldn't be necessary. Well, of course it shouldn't be necessary, but we're still bringing people on this journey. You've got to give some people a little bit more time to catch up. Because they haven't had the same opportunities for immersion, learning, development in these spaces. And for them to be able to feel like they can show up and add a rainbow to their auto signature might be a really big deal. Huge
deal. And I'm going to push on something that I myself have kind of talked trash on. And I'm really, I want to say like I've put a lot of thought into it. It's like, well, these companies are just doing it to make money. And and it's like, actually in a way think that's good. And what I mean by that is that like 40 years ago, a company wouldn't outwardly be chasing the patronage of people from the LGBTQ plus community. They actually wouldn't have done that.
No.
20 years ago, companies would have done it, but in subtle ways. We're in a time now where it's like, well, of course we're going to do that because we want the patronage of those people, and we want people from that community to be a part of our company because we want the best and brightest, and that means we have to cast the widest net. For me, that's like, well, if companies are doing it because they're literally chasing money, that means the recognition of communities being like, oh, they have that. That's essentially saying these are communities who have increasing power and representation in general society, and that might be a kind of a capitalistic way of being it, but we live in a capitalistic society, and that's the way our economy works.
You could go super deep here on the ends justifies the means conversation as well, right? From a philosophical perspective. And in some cases it does. Like if the end justifies the means, then, sometimes that's okay. It's not a clear cut. These kinds of things are never clear cut. It's never, it's not binary. It's not like one or two. There's nuance right across the spectrum.
Totally.
And you've got to live with that nuance.
Well, and like, just like how 40 years ago, companies didn't do that because it would be prohibitive to them to doing well financially. Now, not doing it is prohibitive. That's like an indicator of a huge societal change. I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I understand the kind of me cynical, because I literally on this podcast have been like, oh, your companies doing that. Now I'm like, actually, that's pretty dope that companies have to do that. Like, it's like expected at this point. That's cool.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's kind of interesting, because I think for those that have been in the DE&I space for many years, that has been the primary business case argument to leadership of why they should. Because, taking it's the right thing to do out of the equation again, which I hate doing because I'm a big advocate of doing the right thing. But let's just take that out of the equation. In order to be able to influence the decisions of leadership within organizations, to put resources, whether it's money, whether it's time, whether it's people, behind certain initiatives, you have to bring a business case. And so you've got to be smart about, hitting the right notes when you're building that business case, in order for people to get behind it and rally behind it. And so when you're talking about spending money on DE&I and earning the dollars, usually back in the UK, way ago, it used to be the pink pound was the first way of saying, okay, well, we want women to buy things too. Like, it's an important demographic, and that was your kind of 40 years ago. But now you're talking about, your rainbow dollar and all of these kind of things. In order to demonstrate that there's a business case there, you're demonstrating that they can build revenue off it, that there's profitability in it. But people that have been working in the D&I space for years have been saying this all along. Just gradually people are getting on board, that voice is getting louder, and people are starting to listen. And now it's switched to the fact that, well, if you don't do it, you're actually going to lose money.
Totally.
And you could actually get shut down.
Well, isn't that doesn't say so much about where we're in society. So for anyone who's cynical about it, myself included, I hope that's something to think about, because again, I just had this moment. I know this sounds crazy, on Instagram, where I was like, do I think that's that funny? I do, but I actually think it's a pretty cool thing.
It can go too far. It can go too far, though.
It can go too far,
because sure. there are definitely not all of those attempts and initiatives are come from a good place.
Well, I mean, the one that I was laughing about on a podcast a while ago was, you saw that Pepsi commercial with
yes.
Kendall, was it Kendall Jenner?
Yeah.
That's like too far.
Too far.
And also it's just like shameless, like there's like super important.
Awkward.
Terrible, right?
Awkward. Yeah.
Whoever greenlit that, I hope you've reconsidered.
I know. Yes, 100%. There are many examples like that went too far, took it the wrong way, or it was shameless, and that's not appreciated.
Okay, let's talk about doing the right thing. I have people on this podcast a lot, and we talk about doing the right thing. It's like, oh, you got to do the right thing, and I was thinking about some of our episodes where this doing the right thing is such a theme, and I love it. It's great. And also, we're not always the shot callers, the decision makers, the people with the budget or the people at the last call. And in fact, even at super senior levels, people work for leaders or businesses who will choose to not do the right thing once or many multiple times. And it could be about a lot of things, or it could be around one topic repeatedly. So I know you as a senior leader, you must have experienced some version of this throughout all of your career.
Yep.
First of all, I'm interested in, let's start with what advice you'd have for professionals when they're in a situation where their boss or their company is choosing, despite having all the data, to not do the right thing. So what advice would you have?
I think there's multiple layers of advice to this. First of all, it's gut wrenching. And so kind of taking a moment to just kind of recognize how you personally feel about it. because it can almost feel like a personal attack. If you're the one that's trying to influence that decision, and you've brought to the table the right level of data, information, statistics, knowledge, experience, whatever it might be, to try and influence the doing of the right thing, and regardless and in spite of that, it goes against you, that can be really emotionally challenging. So I think just a moment to process that is important. But then there's also, at what level are you at in your career and in the organization? There's certain times where it's appropriate to say, well, actually my advice is just run, like leave, because there's only so much that you're able to influence, and there's only so much time and attention and heartbreak that you can put into that, where ultimately you're not going to have an influence on the outcome, and having to live with the results of the decision that went against what is the right thing can be damaging to your own career, health, mental well-being, all of those things. And so there's a piece of advice for some people that says you should get out and go and find somewhere where you do feel like your values are aligned, and you're fully kind of lined up and in agreement with how you work through some of these things. But then, on the other level, how much influence do you have, and should then you stay to be able to next time make that case? Or, you feel, I know that I've been in situations where I felt that I've got a certain level of responsibility for those around me, that the right thing gets done. And I'm not ashamed to admit that it's ranged from everything from, throwing the entire data book at a problem, all the way through to having a meltdown and a tantrum because it didn't go the right way. And sometimes it got to that point where it's like, well, if this is the only way you're going to listen to me, is for me to make a complete fuss about something, which isn't my natural style, but for the right thing, I'm going to put myself out there. Then, there's a certain point where you stay and you fight, and you have that kind of sense of responsibility for others. But also recognizing that when you are not the decision maker and you are the influencer, there's only so much you can do. And all of that will be a learning opportunity for the next time, whether it's at the same company or a different company, because it will happen again. And so what did you learn from that? What went well? What didn't go well? What could you have done differently? How else might you have approached it? Who else could you have included in that decision-making process that could have influenced? All of those different factors, there's learning opportunities. So taking just the time just to download all of that, understand it, and be prepared for the next time, especially in HR and many other roles, you will come up against this again. It'll be a different topic. It'll be a different set of people, but the situation of, okay, I need to convince these people to do the right thing will come back again and again and again.
Yeah. Well, adding to that, so if we think of HR, and I would take HR, and this might seem like an odd connection, but I also think of something like social services or people who are really dedicated to creating the right kinds of conditions for people. Within groups of those people, there's like altruistic people, like they care about helping other people. There can be a bit of a give until gone mentality. Which sounds kind of heroic, but at some point it's gone. And so if you say give until gone. I think it's the worst model. And when I was working in the social services, I just saw super talented therapists, super talented frontline workers, super talented people from different levels and organizations go through an absolute grinder. And then one day there was something gone. And it wasn't because the social services are bad, because they're certainly not. It's that they have kind of traditionally not had strong leadership, because their leadership has often been picked on whoever's the last person standing. Like, oh, you're the last. Okay, you're the leader. They're not great leaders. They're not bad people, but they're not great leaders because they haven't been trained in the art of leadership. They've very likely came up in a system that just grinds people down over time, and people quit or have mental health events that pull them out. I see a lot of the same thing in HR groups, where it's like people who are very altruistic, they want to create change, but they have a little of that give until gone type attitude. I just want to encourage people that you shouldn't give until gone, because when you get
too late.
It's too late. Gone is too late. So what are any thoughts on how you can be a HR person who takes care of themselves while also pushing for the right kinds of change?
Yeah, this is huge. And I think this has been a real learning for me as well. Because I think I was one of those give until gone people some years ago. But I think there's been definitely in the last kind of 3 or 4 years a kind of a realization that that's not healthy. I can't be there for my team if I'm gone. I can't be there for my family. I can't prioritize the things in my life that are important. I mean, it's super interesting that you kind of talk about the social work analogy as well. At Ada, we've got 2 social workers on staff, which is incredible.
Yeah.
Like, I've never worked for a company where I've heard of this ever before, where you're in a corporation and, you know, we're 500 people scale up size, but even so, but we have 2 social workers on staff, and and they're there to basically look after the physical and mental well-being of all of our people, which is incredible. And so you can book to have a one-to-one confidential conversation, but the amount of themes that bubble up then from those individuals that are hearing really, really how it is, like they're the only 2 people in our organization that really know how it is because they hear it right at that ground level. The themes that bubble up means that they do have the ability to influence. So if something's getting really bad, or we are doing the wrong thing, they're going to hear about it. It gets bubbled up. We're able to do something about it. And our leadership is open to doing something about it, which is incredible. So that kind of interaction between HR and social work shouldn't be, oh, this might be a strange analogy. It should be, no, this is exactly where they kind of interlink. It's super interesting, I find. But I think that, you know, from a self-care perspective, you do have to be able to compartmentalize a little bit, like what is work and what is person, like who's Kerris, the HR leader, and who's Kerris, the wife, mother, friend, you know, all of those kind of things. And be able to compartmentalize a little bit, the ability to leave the big issues in the work sphere and be able to take enough time and do enough of the things that bring you joy outside of work to the fore that enable you to rest, recharge, repair, get your kind of thinking back on track, and be able to come back again for another day, because there will be other battles, there will be other obstacles to overcome. And if you're constantly worn down by those that are happening, it gets harder and harder and harder to come back and be present enough to be able to be influential.
Heck yeah. I completely agree with you. So like, we hear a lot about like in years we've seen and heard increasing conversations around emotional labor, which is, I just say, a topic is poorly understood by most people. It's like, you know, an Instagram thing or whatever Twitter thing. It's like, like literally, I don't fault people for doing it, but it becomes like such a talking point. Like, well, you know, one group is doing more of the emotional labor. So first of all, everyone, emotional labor is a absolutely normal phenomenon. It's part of every single day. You know, like, if your kid spills a cup of juice on your brand new carpet, you're experiencing emotional labor because you're restraining your reaction so that the next right thing can happen. But emotional labor is like a real deal thing. And marginalized groups, of course, experience a higher amount of emotional labor day to day. And also people who have jobs that are very people heavy, that have a lot of touch points with creating change. They are very often more on the front line of getting burnt out because they carry much more emotional labor day to day. With that in mind, I'm going to flip the script. I've asked you for a lot of advice for HR people. What about advice for business leaders who aren't HR professionals, who are in a business where HR is undervalued, marginalized, don't have a seat at the table? What's your advice there?
Yeah, I would love for more business leaders to really think about how the people in their organization impact their ability to be successful. Because if they took the time and worked with enough people through the organization to be able to understand that, I genuinely believe they would do things differently. And I think that it's so far down the list in any of the business books that they've read or the the courses that they've done, that it's an afterthought. And I think that if they started there and said, okay, this business will only be successful based on the talent that we have within it, and what does that actually mean on a day-to-day basis, and how do I as a leader show up to ensure that we have the right talent doing the right things at the right time to make this organization successful, and start to genuinely understand how people get motivated, how people become loyal, how people show up and give the 110%, the elusive 110%, like how people do, bring their authentic selves to work and feel safe in contributing their talents and their skills and their knowledge in an environment that's not going to knock them back or judge them. And that those things are actually all ingredients to the overall success of the organization. If they actually stop to think about that for long enough and spend some time really digging into that, as much as they do trying to understand where the next sale is going to come from, then I think that people would do things differently.
When you've been in businesses, and again, I know you've worked in a diversity of businesses, so it's not that I'm identifying one or the other, but when you've worked in businesses that trumpet change or good things, but then you see them act differently and you know they act differently, how have you maintained? You are someone that I believe is like, well, I know is super progressive. You're all about creating good, healthy change. You aren't a person who takes it too far. You are the person who's saying, hey, it's not far enough, but you have a good sense of how to get that proper balance here. And I know you have worked in businesses that are very good at kind of talking about like all of the stuff that we're talking about now. And then also perhaps in the background are actually quite reticent to make the changes internally to make good on the public face of what they're saying. How have you maintained in those times?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things. I think that there are usually in an organization, there's usually a group of people that are pushing the needle, making change happen for the good, and creating working environments that are healthy and positive for the large part. And you see the benefits of that, and you see that progress, and you see that grow. And with each program or each initiative or each strategy, you see that you're getting closer and closer to that. And it feels good. And then there's a bad apple or a handful of bad apples that exist within most organizations. I won't say every, but most organizations whose own individual actions don't match up with the work that you're trying to do in order to create an environment that is healthy and positive and engaging and beneficial to the people that work there. And so then you get this kind of conflict and this friction between what is happening that is adversary to what you're creating. And then it's up to leadership to be able to decide, okay, are we genuinely putting our money on us moving in this progressive, growth-oriented, developmental way as an organization for the positive? Or are we going to turn a blind eye to the negativity and the toxicity that is coming out of this small group that are doing these things that is in complete misalignment with what you're trying to create? And those leaders often have either been the protagonists of creating this new way of going, or they've bought into it. It's been brought to them and they've bought into it. So they're already aligned that this is where we should go. And then you've got this nasty issue or issues happening on the side that is in complete conflict with that. And so then it's a business leader's decision. Do you sweep this under the carpet for whatever reason, or do you call it out? And I think that for so many years, in a lot of organizations, it's been easier for leadership to try and sit on the fence and have the two running concurrently. Because if you upset this, it's going to upset the organization. And if you upset this, it's also going to upset the organization. So, leaders have often sat on the fence and not felt that they've had either the courage to be able to come out and call it out and recognize that there may be a short-term loss for a long-term gain, and take the hit on getting rid of these people that are providing that toxic environment, or shut down the behavior that is bringing that kind of toxic environment, because it's going to feel really painful. like it's ripping off the Band-Aid, it's going to hurt a lot because they're either going to lose money or they'll lose other people or there'll be something bad from a reputational perspective or a brand perspective. So it's hard to be able to do the hard thing when if you can just keep it under the covers or under the blanket a little bit longer, maybe nobody will notice and we can, maybe they'll just leave of their own volition.
Yeah.
But it takes a really courageous leader to recognize that whatever's happening over there that's in contrary to what you're trying to create, the culture and the values and the environment you're trying to create, what is happening there, if you're strong enough to shut it down, move it out, get rid of it, fire people if you have to, that actually the long-term benefit to the vast majority of people that work for you, your clients and customers, are going to feel the benefits of that removal of that kind of bad apple, then they're going to see so much more positive benefits come back from it. But when the whole time that you're seeing that decision is not being made, it's really hard because you want to do the right thing, you want to encourage others to do the right thing, and you want to kind of be there for them. And so sometimes you're playing the medium to long game and you're having to constantly revisit, reevaluate, reassess. Sometimes you get new leadership and that can help because there's a different perspective and a way of thinking. They come in a little bit braver sometimes or a little bit less complacent. Sometimes there's, a shift in kind of cultural thinking. Sometimes there's an incident that happens that just kind of brings it to the fore and it flares up and they're forced into making a decision. But yeah, talking about, the resilience side of having to constantly be there to remind them that this decision needs to be made because the longer it stays on, the worse it's going to be for everybody involved, including the organization, and it needs to be shut down, is really hard. And it has a lot of emotional labor because you're living knowing that bad things are happening and you're still having to push for the progress and the positive and the change that you're trying to influence from a cultural perspective. So that brings a lot of emotional labor and the need to be very, very resilient.
Yeah. Would you mind if I give a counseling analogy to that?
Yeah.
A therapy analogy? For mental health and addiction, there's a saying, there's a philosophy about client work, which is if you think of a client's journey to sobriety or to attaining the level of mental health that they want, view it like a journey of 1,000 miles. The biggest mistake a therapist can make is assuming they're the solution. And so that by working with you, you're going to take them to that mile 1,000. Instead saying, oh, I am not the solution at all here. And a lot of therapists will make these mistakes. Like, I'll help that person get sober. I'll help them do this and that. Really what a therapist does, a smart therapist, a strong therapist, a therapist who's brave and who trusts their client and trusts the process, is that you look at it and say, I am likely here to help that person get from, let's say, mile 332 to mile 689. And after that, they will not be at that. I have to just kind of let that work go. If you understand that you're not the solution to something, but you play a very important part in progress towards the solution, then you're going to be able to be in the game. And what I was hearing about what you're saying is that, like, you got to reassess. You've got to, I like when you said play, you got to play midterm to like long-term. You've always got to be rethinking what's going on. Is an active process. So there's clients when I was a therapist that I worked with where I was like, oh yeah, if I think about 1,000 miles, maybe they're like halfway there. I think I can get them to the finish line. I think I can get them over. It's like 5 sessions later, I'm like, oh my gosh, not even close. I have to really rethink my how I'm approaching this from a therapeutic perspective.
Yeah.
And that idea of whatever giant change an organization is going to make, the organization is its own solution. The people in the organization are their own solution, and you're just there to help facilitate it taking certain steps along the line. That's how I believe is a super important part of burnout. Don't view yourself as the solution, but just someone who's around facilitating progress towards the solution. How does that land with you?
I think that's a great analogy, actually, and I think that it's very much how HR operates, in so much as quite often, we're not the decision makers. We're 90% of the time we're the influencers.
Yes.
And business leaders look to HR to bring both objectivity and subjectivity into the conversation to be able to make a decision around something. And so they'll look to HR leaders to bring forward, okay, well, what haven't I thought of? Like, tell me what I'm missing here. What do I need to consider when I'm making this decision? And so they look to us to bring that to the fore, but we're not going to be able to make the decision for them. And ultimately, we have to rely on those leaders to make the decisions that they're going to make with the information that they have, as much educated as they can be at that time. And, all you can, and if you don't get the right decision that you're looking for, don't give up. Like, you've got to come back with something else. And you've got to keep that topic current enough that it chips away and has them rethinking on a regular basis. You bring forward new pieces of evidence, and I'm air quoting because it's, you're bringing forward proof of why that person should make a different decision. And you keep chipping away at it, because ultimately it's about making progress.
Yes.
And you may or may not be still there at that organization when they start making the right decisions, but you've influenced that piece of that progress towards making the right decision.
Totally. I love what you just said there. It's about scaling what the progress is. Like,
Yeah.
what is the progress I think I can do to help it get there? And then how am I going to spend my time?
Yeah.
How am I going to break that down into actionable steps? So like, if we think of something like racism or sexism or, any kind of, any population has been marginalized, our ability as individuals to straight up solve that is very limited.
Very. Yeah.
But our ability to create all sorts of progress is immense.
Yes.
How we look at progress, and then how do we scale it so that we can understand where we can spend our time and where we should spend our time. Not all actions are as valuable. And we could also take it out of progressive work like that to even just like, how do you create like proper workflow in a company? How do you have the right kind of recruiting? Any of these things. If we can avoid ourselves as viewing ourselves as a solution, and instead be someone who creates moments or long terms of progress, it just helps you know where you can spend your time and have the most effect.
Yeah.
And also sometimes, going back to the therapeutic model, sometimes you get to be that person who sees someone cross the the mile 1,000. And I've had that in my career, both as a therapist and doing this, where I'm like, I see someone achieve the thing they want to do. And it's like, hell yeah. But my role was never as the solution. My role was always about the progress. I was just lucky enough to be in the last 10 miles.
Yeah.
And that's really, really cool. But also because I could come in and properly assess where someone was at, I would know where to spend my time and how to push it. So it's about assessment, understanding what progress is, how close people are to that solution, and then scaling your efforts around that.
And it's all an iterative process. I'm a huge fan of iterative processes because I think that quite often the mistake is, okay, I need to get to that mile 1,000. That's my first milestone. Well, it's not. There's 1,000 milestones before you get to that, right? Literally 1,000 milestones. And so if you think about it as, okay, well, that's the only one I'm going to satisfy with, then you're missing an opportunity to celebrate progress at each mile. Yeah. And every time that there's a shift or a change or something positive happens, you're building upon that. It's building, but it's Lego. Like you've got these pieces that you're adding on each time. And as you get closer to that mile 1,000 and someone makes the right decision, whether you were brick 300 or brick 600, that you've had an influence. And I think that as HR leaders, you're advocates for change. You're champions of change. And that's where you have to bring a lot of those kind of communication skills, influencing skills, relationship building skills in order to be really good at advocating and championing for change, because you're trying to influence something that's really hard for people. Behavior. To change behavior is really hard.
Yes.
Well, really hard.
That brings me to something I think is important to talk about. So you and I are of a certain generation, and I don't want to say the right or the wrong of this, but we came up in a world where you had to be resilient in terms of that's what was expected of you in the workplace. You had to be resilient. You had to be tough. You had to be able to manage a certain amount of emotional labor or a lot of emotional labor. You were expected to not challenge that or have an issue with it. You're expected to just come in, work hard hours, do the work. And if you want progress, that's your chosen path. Yeah. we now have generations who say, well, wait, why should it be like that?
Yes.
Awesome. I love that. Great.
100%.
You're right. And we're still working with a diversity of people who come from all sorts of different backgrounds. They have come up in North America. They have come up with a certain system. The idea that you shouldn't have to experience emotional labor, totally agree. But also it's like a normal part. It's just a normal part of psychology.
Yeah.
Or that you shouldn't have to be super resilient. Like, yes, I agree with all those things, but that's not real today or as real as we want it to be. And it likely won't be as real as we want it to be for a long time. So any advice to young professionals who say, well, yeah, but I shouldn't have to do that. And you and I agree. What advice do you have for people entering the work world or maybe like early career who want to have to be a lot less resilient, but they're still in that space?
Yeah. I love this whole topic. I'm fascinated by it because our parents' generation, it was harder for them.
Way harder.
Right?
They had a job and stayed in it for 40 years.
40 years. Yeah. Can you imagine? And, they looked at us when we were starting out in the workforce thinking, oh, well, they've got it easy. And yet here we are sitting there saying that it was hard, right? And so with each generation, I think there's different light bulb moments. But I love the fact that this next generation is coming forward and saying, do you know what? I'm going to put up with that bullshit. Like, that's no longer for me. Yeah. I don't think that we should have to live like that. And I love that they're challenging that. Mm-hmm. I think it's incredible. And I think it's making it better for me too. Mm-hmm. Like as one of those people that, just worked really hard, long hours in the early days. And that was the only way of getting ahead, because that was how your performance was measured. Was very much like, how many hours are you doing? How hard are you working? Like, how many calls did you make compared to the other? Like, there's very different benchmarks today in terms of how we measure performance. But I love that they're challenging it. But at the same time, if you take away adversity, you miss learning opportunities.
Totally.
Right. Totally. And so by being completely shut off from any kind of hardship or adversity, you miss the ability to be able to practice your resiliency muscle, because that's important. It's not just something that you either have or you don't have. You have to practice it. To be resilient, you have to practice being resilient. You have to be thrown a curveball in order to be able to practice being resilient. And you'll do it better or worse depending on what side of bed you get out of. So you need to be able to practice that. And then failure is, as you know, is one of the best learning opportunities. 100%. So if you're not given the opportunity to fail or to do things wrong or to not have had the best support from your manager in that instance, or the technology that you're using is a bit antiquated or outdated, or do you know what, the only time this call can happen is at 6 a.m. in the morning because you're dealing with somebody on the East Coast, or like, if you don't get any of that adversity or hardship, you miss out on so much opportunity to learn. And I think that is something that I would say for those kind of fighting for better working conditions, love it. But at the same time, don't look for perfection, because you will miss out on being able to fail and go through hard times, which builds resiliency.
Yeah, I agree. And also something that I've been seeing, and you might have seen this, or maybe you disagree. I think that if we talk about the idea of like being progressive, I think the pendulum has swung quite significantly one way, and now it's starting to swing back. So we see companies like Netflix who, let's say a year ago, people within Netflix were saying like, hey, we find some of the things that we're creating are problematic and we want to have more of a say of what gets greenlit internally. Now Netflix is actually saying, hey, we create a lot of content here. And if you are uncomfortable working on some of this content, it's totally understandable if you want to find somewhere else. So Netflix has actively said, we are not going to have internal, like our larger internal population govern. If they're uncomfortable with the content, it's totally fine. They just don't have to work here. So that's actually a pretty significant shift. Yeah. We see someone like Elon Musk, and I'm not an Elon Musk lover or hater. I'm relatively neutral, but saying, no, everybody has to come back to work. Yeah. I think from my perspective, the pendulum has started to swing back the other way. And young professionals who maybe in their early career were like, heck yeah, I don't want this anymore. And I'm not going to do it. Or I don't think you need to do this. I don't want this to be resilient, or I don't want to be made uncomfortable. Or it's like, oh, totally. That's great. And I kind of feel like it's swinging back the other way. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there is something to be said about that. I think that I hope that organizations and leaders will look for the positive that's come out of this without feeling like there has to be extremes on a spectrum, and find some balance, because I think that, and I had these conversations with people, especially that kind of younger generation that's talking about, well, why haven't I been promoted yet? Why am I not a director already? Why am I not a VP already? Yeah. And having those conversations with people that I don't think anybody's ever had with them before about, there's a business need and there's an individual need.
Yes.
And there needs to be some alignment between the two in order for the fireworks to go off. And if there's some misalignment there on whatever topic it is, whether it's I want this job, or I want to work, or I don't want to work on that particular product because I don't agree with it. If there's misalignment there, then you need to find alignment another way. You could potentially influence internally, or you might need to seek it externally. Yeah. But there needs to be some balance there, because businesses are there to generate revenue in order to be able to continue to grow and to scale. That's ultimately what they're there for. Right. You hope that they're going to also add on to that. Let's do the right thing. Let's make sure that we're, we have a solid purpose, vision, mission, values, etc. in terms of where we're going. And most companies I think do, but ultimately there is a business need. Does the business need this thing to be true, and an individual need? And you hope and aim for those two to align. Yeah. And when they don't, it's a challenge. And there's going to be disagreement, and some people are going to have to look externally.
Totally. Do you mind if I share something from my own career path? I worked at a company that my experience at the company was quite toxic. It was just very, very negative. And I remember thinking, hey, you know what? There's cool potential here. We're going to change this. And dedicating years of my life to creating a better culture. And at one point I realized, there's a better culture. But what I had to become to make that happen cost me. And I just was maybe the worst version of myself that I'd ever been in my life. Like, I'd adopted attitudes or perspectives or things to do because essentially I had acclimatized to the environment. And the environment, I had found the environment to be quite toxic. And I wanted change to happen, and the change did happen. But also while the company became better, I became worse.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, this isn't worth the cost. Yeah. Being here is like, this is not worth the cost. And I remember being like, I'm going to go back to who I was. And I just went back to who I was. And within a very short period of time, like maybe within a year, I was no longer at the company. And I realized something so valuable from that, which was sometimes the thing that you want to change comes at such a high price that you shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
It's too much of a high price.
Yep. And that's okay.
It's totally okay.
It's okay.
Flip it over. When I started Cadence, I had all these like progressive ideas about it's going to be this and that. And you know what? It is that. I think that this is a super cool company to work with, to work for. I think we have built a super cool culture. I'm super proud of it. We've all built it together. Like our internal surveys, all the work that we do is like comes up strong, really strong results. We've built something good. But there have been multiple times where I've been too soft about certain things because I've been so like, oh, you can find your own path. I won't be over your shoulder. And like all of that's true. But there's been times where I've been like, my experience where I came from a work culture that was very toxic and negative, and it changed me in negative ways, has caused me to be reactive. And now I'm way too loosey-goosey with things. And within the past 2 years, and specifically the last year, I've reined things in considerably in the fact that I think people's desire to have a workforce that has like such negative, you're overtly thoughtful of people's work experience can cause a situation where it's like, well, yeah, but then I'm ending up having to do way too much work. Or where's the accountability? Where's the responsibility? Where's the workflow? Like, where's the planning? Where's any of these things? Yeah. And I had a mirror held up to me about a year ago where I was like, I've been building a company that's been so focused on people's experiences and not focused on the growth of the company, not focused on the health of the long-term financial health of the company, not focused on proper structure and hierarchy and learning opportunities and letting people fail. It's been overtly about taking care of people. Yeah. And it was a really interesting contrast between working in a company that changed me in a negative way to working in a company that doesn't challenge people, that isn't changing people in a way that allows them to grow. I'm really happy that I've got colleagues who've held up a mirror for me, and also like good mentors in my life that held up a mirror. And I think Cadence right now is in a space where I think people are getting the appropriate amount of feedback and challenge.
Yeah.
But if you'd hit me like 2.5 years ago, we didn't even do like internal reviews, we didn't do anything, because I just wanted people to not have to experience the negative things that I've experienced in my career. So there is that, like, you want things to change, but you don't want to change you in a negative way. But you also do want to change people, but hopefully in a positive way.
100%. This is so interesting. And it's human nature, right? Because I think that any experience that you have as an individual, you then step into your next role, whether it's running a company or whatever it might be, with a certain level of bias, because you're bringing those prior experiences with you, and you know what you like and what you don't like. And another one that we've been talking a lot about is then assuming that just because you didn't like a certain management style, that everybody's not going to like that certain management.
Nobody's going to like that.
Yeah. So I hated, like, when I was doing recruiting, on the agency side, I hated the whole kind of, you have to make this many calls, you have to do that many, like all of that. And it was so micromanagement to that. And I was like, I rebelled against that massively. I hated that. But then, as I've kind of grown in my leadership and managed more and more people, some people really want that. They want to be told exactly what to do. They want to be told how many calls to make.
Totally.
Right. And I assumed that just because I hated it, that everybody was going to hate it. So I stopped doing it.
Yes.
But then that person fails.
Yeah. The most obnoxious thing I ever had one of my bosses say to me, well, they weren't talking to me, they were talking about someone else they hired. And it was like, I view my role as a leader to break people down. They come in and I break them down, and then I rebuild them in the image that I think they should be in.
Wow.
And I remember this person saying that and thinking,
God complex much.
Well, totally. I was like, you are such a clown. Especially this person was like, literally had never had another job outside of the company they worked in their life. It's like, you are not experienced enough just as a professional to be talking about this. What an embarrassing thing to say to someone as like one adult to another.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking that and being like, where is the honoring of who people are, their experiences, their differences? So I had this like really like kind of like, who are you? And I wasn't wrong, but I also wasn't right, because, just recently we had someone in the organization, like young talent, who's like unbelievable person, go on to something different, because they're getting paid a ton more money, they get to live, in a cool city, but also they weren't being challenged enough. And I have always kind of, when I bring people into the organization, I'm just like, here's your job, do it however you want to do it. Keep me apprised, but I'm not going to be hanging over your shoulder. And in fact, this person kind of didn't really have a boss. Yeah. Like vaguely I was their boss, but I was like, you do your thing. And something I realized was like, well, that person didn't get enough mentorship, wasn't challenged enough, didn't have enough opportunities. And I thought I was being cool, like, do your thing, you got it. And I'm always constantly pumping their tires, because they were exceptional professional, like great professional. And I thought, like, yeah, they're getting paid more. They went to a different industry entirely. They're living in a cool city. But I wonder if we could have kept that person had I been more focused on really sculpting who they could become. So not as much as that one person I was talking about, but more of an idea of like, well, no, I actually can play a role in your development. Let's talk what that looks like.
Totally.
And it's just funny when you said, like, I've always had this idea about this one leader, like, where I was like, I don't want to be like that person. So sometimes I pick such a far 180. Exactly. And in this case, I'm like, oh, it's too far. I should have been way more involved in that person's development. I was too hands off thinking I was doing the right thing. But really, I was just reacting to this one person that I had in my career too far. And it was a missed opportunity. Yeah.
I remember one time I started a new job, and the leader said to me, my new boss said to me, how do you like to be managed? And that was such an incredible question. Nobody had ever asked me that before. And not only did it make me really think about how I like to be managed, and be honest with myself too, because how you like to be managed and how you should be managed are often quite different. Like, I like to be managed by, like, just leave me alone. But what I actually need is more accountability. Yes. Right. So it made me think, but it also was really helpful for him to be able to situationally manage me different from his other direct reports. Totally. And I thought that was it's really simple and really smart. And don't just ask it for the sake of it. You really need to listen. But I think that as leaders, we've got, and people managers, we've got so much responsibility. And these people come into our teams expecting something in return. And they want leadership, development, training, coaching, mentorship, and accountability and feedback and all of these things. And if we think that they want to be managed in a certain way, but we haven't actually asked and made them think about how they should be managed as well as how they want to be managed, it's such a missed opportunity.
I totally agree. And what you said about like how I would answer that question versus what I really need is interesting. Because where did I grow professionally the most? At that one job where the boss was like, I break people down. I grew the most. I grew because I had to acclimate myself to what I felt was a very toxic culture. I had to acclimate so I could survive.
Yes.
That's not a great way to learn, but where did I grow most as a professional? That one, 100%. I'm successful now with Cadence because of what I experienced there. And also like growing up playing in punk bands and everything. Yeah. Is a huge part of it. The two places where I've grown the most as a professional was being in that space and having to survive and like being like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get through this? And figuring things out. And then in Cadence, because nobody is going to come and tell you what to do. Nobody's going to save me. Nobody's going to give me clients or anything. I had to be like, oh shit. And like, it's been a period of like such intense growth, because when people depend on you and there's no one above you to save the day, it's like constant reflection, like, did I do the right thing? Am I full of shit? Yeah. Do I actually know what I'm talking about? Is it some weird middle ground, which it is like, you know, like what is it? I know if someone said to me, hey, Aram, how do you like to be managed? I would probably say, oh, just like, trust me, you know, like give me some give me feedback, you know, like stuff like that. But really the code would be just leave me alone. Leave me alone. Yeah, totally. What do I really need? I need someone who holds my feet to the fire, holds up the mirror, makes me be accountable, challenges me as appropriate. And also when I like push back or have like a little bit of like meh kind of moment, will be like patient with me, but then still be firm with me. Be like, okay, you can have your moment. Yeah. You done? Okay, this is what we need to do. I don't have that anymore. So I have to do all of that to myself. And it's really interesting because like I say it's interesting, at least it's interesting to me. I can talk all about all of this, like being a CEO. Most of it was learned by having really bad bosses, and then also realizing, oh shit, well now I'm the boss. So how do I not be a bad boss? Yeah. But also, bad bosses come in a lot of different formats. Yes. What version of a bad boss am I trying to avoid right now, and what version of a bad boss might that cause me to become? Yeah. 100%. And it is about being able to flex your style as a boss, because everybody needs something different. And it's really helpful for that person to, evaluate what it is they actually need, not want, from a manager, but then be able to articulate it and communicate it. And you as an individual be able to say, oh, that person needs more from me in that particular area, and that person needs more from me in that particular area. You know, and it's so fascinating, I think, and people forget that that people have different needs and need different styles, and even sometimes I need to be managed differently depending on the situation and the circumstance. Like if I'm way out of my depth on something, then I actually need you to be a little bit more directive. But if I'm, you know, completely in my comfort zone, then please forget about me and like just let me get on with it. So you have to be so situational, and it's only managers that are able to bring that kind of empathy and understanding who can actually kind of switch the way of managing, but also that are comfortable in saying, what do you need? Tell me what you need. How can I do better for you? Like, what do you need from me as a manager in order for you to be more successful? Totally. I even just think of this morning, 2 conversations I had. One where it's like, this person totally knows what they're talking about. I should just step out of this and let them do their thing. Yeah. To my very next conversation was like, what's going on in this person's world right now is they don't realize they're over their skis. I have to step in a kind way and assert a little bit more control. And being able to read that situation and be from call to call. And like I love what you said, like flex your style. Yeah. That matters. And also, does it matter in your first job as a leader? No, because in the first job, you're a leader, you're learning, you're going to do all these things. But for senior leadership, you got to be able to move with people. Now, speaking of senior leadership, I think there's a good time to pivot into, tell us about what you're doing today.
Doing today. So working in a whole new space for me, which is in the tech space. So working for a company called Ada as their head of people. So I look after recruitment, total rewards, benefits, compensation, all of what we call our employee experience, HR business partners, learning and development, DEI, as well as some internal events and communications. And Ada is a really, really fun organization. With a really compelling like backstory, as well as a kind of vision to where they're going and what they're looking to achieve. And again, they're kind of progressive in terms of their thought process. And let's try new things and let's, see how this works out and let's see if we can figure this out. And it's really cool. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but they're open to trying, which I think is a really exciting environment to work in. We're kind of in a scale up phase as well right now. So it feels like chaos.
Yeah.
Like every day is new chaos to come and bring on board. And it's that interesting kind of adolescent phase where they think they know everything, but they don't really. And there's this kind of craving for some structure, but rebelling against it at the same time. And yeah, so they're like a 15-year-old at the moment in terms of kind of that maturity. So it's super fun. So yeah, lots of kind of building and creating and influencing, culturally and developmentally how the organization grows. So lots of fun.
So is it possible for a company that is scaling up so quickly and also has like your average worker hasn't been there that long, is it possible to have an intentional company culture?
This is a fascinating question. And this was something that when I was speaking to Ada about joining them was one of the question marks in my mind. It was like, okay, how does an organization that's A, digital first, B, very, very young, C, scaling up super quickly, how do they create culture? Like what does that look like? What does it feel like? And so that was one of the kind of the big question marks. And that was my leap of faith. So there was a lot of things I was super comfortable with. And there's a couple of things where you're always taking a leap of faith. And that was one of the leaps of faith. And I don't know that I've got a solid answer, but what I've learned over the last 9 months is incredible. And the answer is generally yes, although it's evolving and changing and will continue to do so for years to come. And so the constant is change. But in terms of that culture, there's been a very clear precedent set by the founders, as well as some of the longer serving individuals in senior roles. And, that kind of foundation from where that culture comes is very strong and very clear. It comes out in the values. For example, like empathy is one of our value. Courage is one of our value. Authenticity is one of our values. So when you think about those as values, you think about, people showing up for each other within an organization, providing feedback and being courageous around that, coming as their authentic selves, their whole, what we call the whole human. This is why we have social workers on staff and others, because, we recognize that it's not just the person between the hours of 9 to 5. Like you've got things happening in your personal life that are going to influence your ability to bring your best self to work. And so how do we support that as a whole human? But that kind of culture from the ground up is really, really tangible, and you can feel that. And then there's this this kind of community that's been built in Slack. So the Slack is what we use as our main form of communication, our communication tool. And there's this incredible community that's been built there that is such a mix of work and personal that from 1 minute I can go from collaborating with finance, legal, and marketing on a particular project in Slack asynchronously to then going to #dog chat, and, which is one of my favorites.
Of course.
Or #random, another one where I've learned many, many things over the last 9 months. But there's these other like pockets where you're having your water cooler conversations. And so, rather than standing next to a water cooler and going, oh, look what a cute thing my dog did yesterday, it's posted in #dog chat. And so in between meetings, I can go, oh, look at the puppies. It's such it's an incredible community there where people have that ability to engage with each other in a way that I didn't think was possible in a virtual environment. So it's super interesting.
Yeah, well, I love what you're saying. First of all, like around virtual environments, like I just encourage people when they're like, oh, unless it's face to face, it's not the same. Really? My two best friends, one lives in Boston, the other one's in Seattle. Like they're still my best friends. And the guy in Boston, I see every 2 or 3 years. The guy in Seattle during the pandemic, I didn't see him for years, or at least 2 years. These are like my closest friends. You can absolutely have great environments done, great cultures, all those things. It's just like anything. You just learn how to do it.
You have to be intentional about it, and you have to be purposeful about it. And does it take more effort? Maybe a little bit to begin with, but then it becomes second nature, and that just is. Not to take away from being in person with people. Love it. Clearly, it's great to see you.
Yeah, of course, but it's fine, right?
But it's okay.
I gotta I just encourage people like that. The whole working remote thing is totally fine. Like companies can totally do it.
Yeah.
People could totally do it, have a great culture. You do have to be intentional. It requires a higher level of management. But what I'd say is I don't think that people in their face-to-face interactions have enough intention.
Right.
I think one of the worst things about the work world is people not being intentional enough in their interactions, which leads to all sorts of things that we talk about. You have to be more intentional online. That's good.
Yep. It's a good thing.
Yeah. Can I push on a couple of those values that you talked about, company values? How can empathy be a company value?
It's really about how we show up for each other. That's what it kind of gets to. So I get your point. How is empathy a value? But it's the behaviors that come out from what the word what the word empathy invokes. And so it's about intentionally supporting each other and our clients and customers and that piece of it, and just really looking to take the time to understand and really genuinely understand what is it about that other person or that client or that customer or that team member that will help you and them have better relationships and build and be more creative in terms of the products that we develop or the projects that we work on together. So that kind of empathy piece is, and it's incredible. I didn't know it would be this intense, but it comes through in so many interactions. And we've got channels like we've got gratitude, which is a really strong one, where people are calling out constantly. There's multiple times a day, how great other people are and the amazing things they've done for them or their colleagues or their clients or whatever. And just that time to just kind of, you okay? Good. Seriously, how are you doing? And be really real about it. It shows up in the behaviors.
It does. And so the reason I pushed on that, is because I find that interesting for empathy being a value. And I don't have a good or a bad take on it. Just I was more curious about it. The reason I'm talking about it now that you're in the seat that you're in, things like company values, or when people say our pillars or whatever it is, you can kind of have one or two things. And I actually will boil it down to one or two things. You've got a bunch of well-intentioned people who came together and were like, that's it. I love that. That's great. And then if you were to ask them 3 or 4 questions about that thing, they'd be like, oh, I don't know. I don't know it. I mean,
sounds good.
It sounds good. And we mean it. And it's not that I don't think they mean it. It's just they haven't done the rigorous work to understand what it means versus doing the rigorous work. I'll give you an example. There's an organization where we have a mutual friend who works there who came up with a set of pillars that I think are the most thought out pillars I've ever seen. And they did multiple full day sessions on their feet, talking about these things, like small group work, doing it by iteration, which I'm a huge fan of. They came up with something that is so thoughtful. And it doesn't mean that if someone looked at it, they wouldn't be like, yeah, what does that even mean? Or why'd you, but that's my jerk voice. That's like, or I call it my idiot voice. It's like, yeah, what does that mean? And I act like that myself, but people can look at it and be skeptical and try and poke holes in it. It's not that people shouldn't do that. And then when you come up with pillars or values, you should anticipate people are going to be like that.
Yeah.
Of course they're going to be like that. Not because people are bad, because people have a right to be skeptical. It's about whether or not you can be in the conversation and be like, oh, totally. Yeah. Oh, you think that sucks? Tell me why you think that sucks. Let me tell you why I think it doesn't. Like,
Yeah.
let's have that conversation. Oh, why did we pick these words? Great. Let's talk about it. So when I asked you about the empathy piece, and I hope you didn't feel I was trying to do a
No,
gotcha moment, just I thought empathy is an interesting
it
value,
is. Yeah.
value to have. The fact that you could speak about it like, oh yeah, do.
Yeah.
That's the difference maker for me at senior levels. Senior levels is such a wild space to be in, because you're like kind of responsible for architecting all of this stuff, and you're taking your best shot at doing what you're like, I hope this captures what will be
There's
best
a lot
for
of
your-"
hope.
Yeah, like a lot of hope.
There's a lot of hope.
But you got to be willing to be in those discussions.
Yeah.
And so you now in a company, again, scaling up really fast, like going from 20,000 people to 500 people.
Yeah.
Actually, which is harder, being in the 20,000 people role or the 500 people role?
Probably the 500 people role.
Right. So
There's less places to hide.
yeah, there's less places to hide. Okay. What's been the thing that has challenged? Actually, I'll tell you, let me ask you it this way. Now that you're in this role, you understand you understand like all of the challenges ahead. How has this role changed you for the better?
Ah, gosh, that's a great question. From a professional perspective, again, it's that next level of accountability and responsibility. It's the ability, again, to be able to make smart decisions quickly, but also not being afraid to fail, because we do have that opportunity. And then, you know, I guess professionally and personally kind of mixed in as a leader, you know, you really are day by day rallying people together under a common cause to be able to help manage that change. And they're doing it with a level of change that's being exerted upon them on a regular basis. And so it's super interesting. So just being there's more switch from the weeds to the top. That happens a lot quicker. So getting comfortable right in the weeds of something at that kind of granular level. It could be an employee relations issue. It could be, you know, where do we spend our next $5,000 on a DEI initiative? It could be, you know, what are we doing to help get better data from our talent acquisition tracking? Like anything from in that kind of weeds to that top level. Okay, are our values the right values? You know, are we heading in the right direction from a culture perspective? Like, how do we think about digital first going forward? How are we managing asynchronous communicate? Like the top level thinking pieces of, you know, are we paying, you know, the right salaries to people? Is our compensation mix like, you know, thinking the kind of, so that switch between the weeds and the strategy piece is quicker.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing you say that. One of the best CEOs I've ever known, I saw go from like 40,000 feet thinking to like a blade of grass in a heartbeat, and then like shoot right back up. And I was in a meeting where everyone was quite used to that. And I was like blown away that this person who runs like tens of thousands of people work in this organization, that he could just go from like to the most detailed thing that someone would be doing in a day, like a frontline person, and understand it all the way back up. The ability to do that at a senior level, I think, is like exceptional and totally necessary.
But the ability to do it without causing chaos when you go down to the weed.
Yes.
Because if you just jump in, mess about with the weeds, and then get back out again, and you just leave a trail of chaos behind you, that's not helpful either.
Yeah. That's a great addition. It's about going down and demonstrating understanding and being able to like check in with something without going down and being like, well, I want it to be like this, that, or that, and like mess it up. Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. All right. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions that are closing off.
Okay.
All right. These are the 3 hardest questions you're going to be asked all day. Okay. You ready?
No.
Okay. Okay. Tell me about get shit done and how that's changed for you over time in your career.
Okay, good. So fondly, my team gave me a hashtag. Like this never happened before.
It is a unique to you hashtag.
It is. It's okay, Kerris, this is your hashtag, and it is get shit done. And it has been my, I guess, modus operandi for many, many years in terms of how I operate. I'm an obstacle remover. I'm a focus on the prize, move forward, progress, iteratively, go forward this way type of person, and always have been. And so, when we're working as a team going towards a goal, then I'm going to be kind of pushing to do that. And so my team gave me this amazing hashtag of Get Shit Done, which I love. And I've got mugs and I've got notebooks and pens and signs and all kinds of paraphernalia that they've bought, sticky notes that they've bought me over the years.
You got a whole merch drop about
whole merch drop.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Which I love. And it's fantastic. And it does, kind of describe me very, very aptly. And I know it was an appreciated strength of mine from my team. However, like anything, there's always a flip side. And this Get Shit Done hashtag also was through somebody amazing helped me do a 360 feedback, helped me get the feedback that Get Shit Done mentality was showing up as me just being good at executing and not being the person that they would turn to be a strategic thinker. And that was such an incredible piece of feedback that I've had throughout my career, was that it's okay to be good at something and do it really, really well. And we should all play to our strengths and all those good things. But sometimes it can go too far and be detrimental because it was actually holding me back from career development and progression, because the perception was that I could only get the execution done. I couldn't do the strategic thinking. Yeah. And so I had to step up my ability to demonstrate that I could do both and that I had the skills to do both. And once I was more intentional about that, about kind of putting my best foot forward from a strategic thinking perspective, things started to change for me from a career development perspective.
Okay, great answer. Spencer, what's the hashtag for My Leadership Style? I'll come back to you. Think about it. All right. Wait, I got to ask Kerris 2 more questions.
Not everybody gets a hashtag.
I know. I'm saying. I hope it's good. All right. Question number 2. Very, very difficult.
Okay.
I have had the pleasure of getting to know your team over time. Yeah. And also I've known your leaders as well. You've had some pretty incredible mentors in your life. Is there any mentor that you want to shout out? And is there anything that, and you could say no if you don't want to, but are there any mentors you want to shout out? And also, what for you is the most important thing that you consider around your own mentoring other people? Like, what's the thing that you hold dearest in your heart around mentoring?
I love mentorship. I think this is amazing. So there's probably 2 I'll call out. One was at a time in my career where I was shifting away from a great career that I'd had in kind of on the agency recruiting side, and developed and grown in my leadership and all that kind of great stuff, even run my own business for a while and all sorts of, really fond of it. But we're shifting away to that into a different kind of role. And this guy, Len Posniak from Catalyst Paper, took a chance on me. He hired me from agency recruiting into a pulp and paper manufacturing company, of which I'd never worked, in a role that not only had some of the elements of the recruiting side, but also had HR function to it as well. And he gave me a chance. And he's retired now, but he'd kind of seen it all and been there and done it and got the t-shirt. So his level of experience and knowledge, but also the level of humor and empathy. But also he was somebody that would stand up for the people, but could sit down at a board table and be super, super strong, but very influential. Like, just seeing him in action and seeing him work, and also knowing that he had my back at every single step. He would say something like, Kerris, if you fuck up through an act of volition, like, I'm sorry, there's no saving it. Yeah. But if you're coming at something and you fuck up because you're doing something from the right place, and you believe that you're making the right decision with all of the information you have, and you've got the right intention, I've got your back 100%. So never sit back and don't do something because you're a bit scared. Like, give it a shot, try something, do something. And that was amazing advice. I love that. And then the second person I'd shout out is Kerry Fraser.
Friend of the show, Kerry Fraser.
Friend of the show. who also, when she was leaving Collier's, my last company, she stood up and said, you should give Kerris a shot. And, that kind of, again, that faith and into taking that huge leap from being in a world that was comfortable for me because I'd been in it for a long time, a space I was comfortable in, into a whole new world of leadership. And her having that faith in me and vocalizing it, and just letting me know that she had the kind of trust in me that I could do it was huge. And that gave me a lot of confidence to be able to kind of go into that role. And even the gazillions of areas I didn't know and I didn't have experience in, knowing that she thought I'd get it and I could learn it and I could get there was powerful.
Oh, yeah. All right. So around mentorship, what's near and dear to your heart about it? Like from your style of mentorship, like what do you keep central in your approach to it?
Yeah, I love doing mentorship. It's just something that it's just I get so much back from it, right? You kind of have these conversations and you're the mentor and they're asking all these questions, but you ask questions back and you dig into it and you explore and you evaluate. And I learn so much from that too, that I get so much out of it. So I always try and go in with a completely open mind and a whole ton of curiosity. Because if you as a mentor just teach, you're missing the opportunity to be taught. And so I always try and show up to ask the questions as well of like, if they're coming to me, okay, I've got this particular issue I want to deal with. Ask so many questions because you can be taught as well. And through that process, both of you come out with some learning. And so by just teaching, you're missing the opportunity to be a mentor.
Heck yeah. All right. You ready for the last question? It's the hardest. Right. You might bow out. I don't know. Okay. You're a dedicated motorcyclist.
I am.
Who is the most annoying and why? Pedestrians, drivers, cyclists, or other motorcyclists? I only get to pick one. You have to pick one and why.
Drivers. Yeah, I'd say drivers and I'd say why. And I've been a driver like since I was 17 for many, many years. But I think drivers, when you're a motorcyclist, are probably the biggest hazard because there's less instinct when you're driving to think about a two-wheeled motorized vehicle coming around the corner or coming in the other direction. It's just less instinctive. And so not through any kind of act of malice, but I think drivers just are thoughtless when it comes to motorcyclists.
Have you ever beefed with a driver?
Maybe.
I will say, as someone who I've done a lot of cycling in my life, man, I've beefed with drivers hard, and be like, you're in Vancouver. In any day, I can be on all three sides of I could be someone who's walking and I could be looking at a cyclist like, how dare you? But then like an hour later, I could be on my bike and look at a car and be like, how dare you? Or be in my car and look at a pedestrian and be like, how dare you? So
100%.
We live in a city of high offense at all times. But I will say the motorcyclist car relationship seems it's rife with difficulties.
Well, and just that lack of visibility. If I'm riding in a lane, a car won't see me and think that they can pull into that lane, and it's like, hello, I'm here, look out. And even the most annoying thing, you're going to get me started now. The most annoying thing is they mess up, you point it out to them, and they get cross with you. It's like, no, but you were the idiot, not me.
Totally. And also,
and you're cross at me? What, for being here?
I have definitely been on both sides of that equation too, where I'm like, how dare you? And then 5 minutes later, I'm like, they were right. I actually was so wrong. But I've also been like, how dare, what? You're mad at me? You're the one who did it. Okay. This is it. This has been a great conversation. As we're closing off, anything you want to draw attention to, any shout outs you want to give, you want to share it, tell people where they can find you?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm absolutely there. I think, one shout out I would give is, as I said, we're a company in high growth. We're scaling up. There's a ton of opportunity at a really fun company that has an amazing culture. Are we perfect? No, but we've got a lot of things right. And so if anybody's looking for a fun tech role, helping to bring VIP experiences for brands, check us out. ada.cx.
Heck yeah. Excellent. All right. Any last words as we're closing off?
No, thank you though. This has been so much fun.
Heck yeah. This is great. Oh, wait, Spencer, what's the hashtag?
Own your shit.
Oh, I like it.
Hashtag own your,
Your
shit.
shit.
That is a yes, 100%. And I like to feel that I own my
Because
shit.
you can say that to people, or it's for yourself.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time trying to own my shit. Good, man.
That's brilliant.
Get shit done. Own your shit.
And your shit, there's so much shit.
Yeah, there's a lot of shit. There's a lot of shit. Well, on that note, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much. And Spencer, drop the beat.
One.